obviously 60% of Democratic voters are for a ceasefire and think that, there's something wrong with Israel. Is this reeking of desperation on behalf of Western powers? Is the power shifting so much that we're just seeing this genocide in real time and we have no ability to stop it? Is American power and influence, and Israel as well, are they under threat? I mean, is empire going to crumble, I guess is my question.
Yeah, well, I don't think it's going to happen overnight, but we're definitely seeing a rapid decline in U.S. hegemony, and especially in this region. And of course, it goes without saying, but just to emphasize, this is one of the most strategic regions of the world. The Middle East, or a better term people are using now is West Asia, because, Middle East, it's like compared to what? Compared to Europe, right? It's West Asia. And in this region, of course, you have 5 of the top 10 oil producers on Earth, and also half of the world's top gas producers, concentrated, of course, in the Persian Gulf region. And now what we've seen is, in the past 20 years, with the economic rise of China has become the world's largest oil importer. And China is also the largest trading partner of most of the countries in the region, not only Iran, but also historic U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So there's that geopolitical shift. There's another huge shift, which is not talked about enough, which is, I think, one of the most important shifts in the past 20 years, which is that the U.S. has gone from being the world's largest importer of oil to the world's largest producer of oil. And that was largely because of 3 main factors. One, after the 2008 financial crash, the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Central Bank, dropped interest rates to basically zero, and they had this quantitative easing program, which means that there was all this liquidity going around to fund new investment, and some of that went into expanded oil production and oil exploration. 2, the shale production, which is very important. So as oil prices rose, it became more profitable to do new oil drilling for shale. And that meant that the U.S. became the world's largest oil producer. And then finally, the other factor is OPEC has basically been expanded. OPEC is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. It was created in the 1970s. As a group of oil-producing nations, largely in the global south, and they used that oil, their oil power, as a geopolitical tool in the 1970s, actually involving Israel. In response to the 1973 Yom Kippur War, OPEC tried to launch an oil embargo of the West in support of the Palestinians. Well, what's happened is that OPEC was basically kind of neutered in recent decades, especially with the U.S. rising as a significant oil producer. But now, since about 2014, Russia has basically joined OPEC. It's now called OPEC Plus. It's a de facto member. And that means that Saudi Arabia and Russia are working basically together when it comes to international oil prices. So we've seen that Biden has been repeatedly trying to pressure Saudi Arabia to increase its oil production in order to drop oil prices, which would drop inflation, because the rising energy prices have been one of the biggest contributors to consumer price inflation. However, Saudi Arabia said no. And in fact, Russia and Saudi actually decreased oil production to try to increase oil prices. So we've seen this confluence of factors involving oil and gas. But furthermore, again, the fact that China has become the largest trading partner of the region, that means that many countries in the region are no longer looking at the U.S. as their most important ally. They're looking eastward. And this means that the U.S. actually is losing many of its allies in the region. The Iraq war was a failure. The Afghanistan war was a failure. The U.S. is being pushed out of Syria. And we now see that today, again, is February 4th. The Biden administration just launched airstrikes on Iraq and Syria, hitting 85 targets. And they've repeatedly attacked Iraq and Syria because there are attacks on the U.S. soldiers in Iraq and Syria who are there illegally. The governments of Iraq and Syria have called for the U.S. troops to leave. So all of these factors are coming together, and the U.S. is being pushed out of this region, which is it has really had hegemonic control over since the end of the British Empire, right? Really, since you could say the 1950s and the Suez Canal crisis, the British Empire significantly declined, and the U.S. kind of took its place. And we now see it being pushed out. So Israel is really the last key U.S. ally remaining. Even close U.S. allies like Saudi Arabia and Egypt are now looking more eastward, and they both, as of January, they both are now part of the BRICS with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. So this is, I think, this really explains why the U.S. is so strongly supporting Israel, because, you know, there's this famous joke that people say in Washington, this famous quote, which is that Israel is an